And perfect. There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us today for our fourth SPRE module for art spaces in our series. And we're thrilled to welcome you back or welcome you for the first time if you're joining us. My name is Alex Glass, and I'm the Executive Director of ArtsBuild Ontario. ArtsBuild is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the development and sustainability of creative spaces across the province. We provide tools, training, and resources to help arts organizations plan, manage, and finance their spaces they need to thrive. Our work centers on strengthening the infrastructure behind the arts so artists and organizations can focus on what they do best, creating and engaging communities. We've got a fantastic session ahead of us, and today we're joined by two longtime collaborators of ABO. We have Kendra Fry and Reid Henry, who will be digging into approaches to business modeling for social purpose real estate development from a holistic framework. Following Reid's presentation, we'll wrap things up with a Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A box at any point during the session, and we'll make time to get to them at the end. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that ArtsBuild Ontario operates out of the 44 Gaukel Creative Workspace building, a settler space on the traditional territory of the Attawandarog, the Anishinaabeg, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We're located in what is now called Kitchener, Ontario, on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and extends 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. As an organization committed to supporting arts facilities and creative spaces, we acknowledge that these spaces are not defined solely by colonial infrastructure, and that creative space includes the land itself. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. SPRE for Art Spaces is a 3-year initiative that explores the pressing issues, needs, and creative responses surrounding social purpose real estate in the art sector. This work is made possible thanks to our dedicated partners and advisory committee, who include the Toronto Arts Council, City of Toronto, Toronto Metropolitan University's Creative School, the Infrastructure Institute at U of T's School of Cities, OCAD-U's Cultural Policy Hub, and Creative Collisions. We're also grateful for support from the Department of Canadian Heritage, Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Arts Council, and Toronto Arts Council, and the City of Toronto, who have all extended their support for this project and this important work. You can find more information about our ongoing projects and programs on our website as well. We're pleased to have Kendra Fry with us here today. Kendra is the lead consultant on SPRE for Art Spaces and a longstanding collaborator with ArtsBuild. Kendra is a cross-sector leader committed to revitalizing faith and heritage spaces through initiatives that support the common good, like affordable housing, arts hubs, and food security programs. With her work at Re11, she's transforming churches across Canada into dynamic spaces that serve community needs. I'll now hand things over to Kendra to take us through this session and the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Alex. Man, you make me sound cool. We know this is happening over lunch for a lot of you, so feel free to take breaks, eat. It's good for everyone to have some food. Use the chat to share your thoughts and reflections as we go, and we can comment there as well. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions, and we'll review them at the end. And if you have any access needs, just drop a note, and the ABO staff will assist with that. Now, the session is being recorded and it will be available on the website, and the presentation slides will be shared in both English and French. So now we're going to welcome Reid Henry as today's featured speaker for SPRE 104, Business Modeling for Social Purpose Real Estate. Okay, before I do his official introduction, I saw Reid do this talk in Detroit at the Social Purpose Real Estate Conference last year, and it was like a mic drop. He did the whole presentation, and the whole room was like, what? You just told us everything we need to know in one fell swoop. So I look forward to him sharing it with all of you today, and you may need to revisit it after to gather everything. Reid is an urban strategist and nonprofit executive with over 20 years of experience in mission-driven development, city building, and infrastructure strategy, especially in service of the cultural and creative sectors. His work spans cities across North America and internationally, from cultural hubs and artist spaces to district-wide infrastructure planning. Reid has led transformative projects through nonprofit development enterprises and urban consultancies in Toronto, Calgary, and New York. We're thrilled to have Reid leading today's webinar. not only because of his impressive track record, but because of his deep understanding of how community trust, market knowledge, and stakeholder relationships shape the realities of real estate development. So in today's session, Reid will share a holistic planning framework that helps organizations align their mission, operational capacity, and capital planning to bring complex development projects to life. Over to you, Reid. I'm going to turn my camera off and let you go to town.
Thanks, Kendra. That always sets the bar high, those intros. Good afternoon, I guess, or morning, wherever you are in Canada. Thanks to everyone for taking a few minutes out of your busy day. And I should say happy Pride Month. I believe that has begun, and it's the same in the US as well as Canada. Um, Living as a Canadian in Jersey for the past few years, I genuinely appreciate reconnecting with sane people at every opportunity. So again, thank you for that, for the opportunity. I have a lot to throw at you today, so I'm just going to jump right in and we'll walk through the agenda a little bit to give you a sense of what's happening. I'm just going to talk a little bit about setting the context for SPRE for arts and culture. One of the big sort of tools that I've used in my history is called the Iron Triangle of social enterprises, sort of a conceptual model that I like using. So I'm really going to walk through that today. And each of the three components of that triangle is we'll use it as a bit of a guide for going through a lot of different nuances of doing this type of work. And then finally, I'm going to sort of share cSPACE Project's business model canvas out of Calgary and just sort of wrap it all up and show you how it all comes into a single visual tool for working with your teams and your boards. So let's get started. I'm just going to start with some context that everyone in this group is no doubt well aware of. Most of the infrastructure that nurtures and sustains a city's artists and small nonprofits and cultural entrepreneurs exists in urban spaces and places that are often transitional, temporary, or at risk. It's just a reality of our life in cities. So these are the maker spaces, the rehearsal venues, artist studios, creative workspaces, small galleries and theaters that exists in a lot of our different communities. We know these small to medium scale facilities are critical to creative production in cities and underpin a greater inclusivity in culture making. So while they're often the backbone of the cultural sector, they face immense competition for space in the communities they help activate and are often required to navigate through increasingly rapid cycles of gentrification and displacement. So in many of the large cities I've worked in, neighborhoods and districts are transforming in a matter of years, not decades, as they once did. So for many artists and cultural workers impacted by that ebb and flow, the nomadic life in a city generates instability of tenure, isolation from the communities that they embed within, and uncertainty driven by the resulting, precarity of their livelihoods. So often this triggers communities of creatives to look elsewhere for places to invest their talent, their passion, and their vision. I've worked on buildings and cultural infrastructure plans in various cities around the world, many of which are intended as strategic responses to that crisis of affordability and displacement. I just came back from the inaugural Creative Land Trust Summit in San Francisco, where about 20 different cities from around the world, including a really great Canadian contingent, I might add, all shared ideas and experiences on how their cities and organizations are addressing that sort of increasingly common and urgent challenge with various models of social purpose real estate. So these types of community-centered entities engage a more entrepreneurial, equity-focused, and partnership-driven approach to protecting and building and sustaining the spaces that the diverse communities of creatives need to remain vital and sustainable and innovative. And they're challenging to develop successfully. They require a lot of capabilities ranging from real estate development, partnership building, fundraising, financing, property management, all the way to public space activation, inclusive programming, and really core to all of this is a deep ability to engage with communities. So looking globally, every model is as unique as a fingerprint. Its approach is shaped by its distinctive location, its cultural context, community aspirations, and ultimately also its funding landscape. There is a toolbox that we're all sort of used to playing in of municipal planning policies and levers that are increasingly used at a lot of different scales to address the impact of property market volatility, speculation, and that's all impacting affordability, stability, and accessibility of cultural production and consumption spaces. It's not an exhaustive list, but they can include things like below market transfer of public assets that are surplus or in the process of redevelopment and can be deployed for things like meanwhile use, temporary use. There's inclusive zoning strategies. That's often the stick behind partnerships with the private sector developers. An example might be requiring affordable workspace in transitioning post-industrial areas that aspire to some degree of, no net loss of cultural production space as they change. There's density bonusing policies. This is usually the carrot for a lot of partnerships. Transactional though they might be, between sort of developers, municipalities, and the cultural sector. Property tax abatement for assets owned by nonprofits or operated by the private sector at below market rates for cultural use is another tool. Government capital grant programs for preserving and enhancing and building new cultural spaces. We all know some of the federal level work that's provided there. Used a little bit more in US cities, there's various tax incentive frameworks that are used to support private investment in economically challenged communities or adaptive reuse of historic buildings. Beyond municipalities, accessible funding and affordable financing tools supported by the philanthropic sector have become critical, including everything from low-cost financing platforms such as, loan guarantees and impact investing, and things like community bonds. And of course, there's traditional debt financing. Despite all of those kind of concerted efforts to generate a better enabling environment, many small to mid-sized organizations don't have the organizational capacity or the political relationships or the types of capital required to leverage the opportunity or to, navigate the complex processes that unlock a lot of those resources. My colleague, Michelle Tabbitt at Left Bank Co. in Sydney has come up with a really nice way of capturing what she calls a creative space development cycle. And generally, it identifies the breadth of skills and capabilities needed to bridge those gaps that I just talked about between organizations seeking creative space and those providing it in many cities. The cycle that's on the slide in front of you, it illustrates about 5 distinct phases with various goals associated with them. The phase 1 advocacy, this is really where a strong and coherent rationale is shaped for why key stakeholders should play a role in making space for culture. It relies on evidence-based research, engagement, and advocacy with a lot of different stakeholder groups and policy development to build awareness and enable solutions. This is often led by the municipality or an arts council and includes investments in cultural space research and sector surveys. Phase 2 pipeline. This is really where a flow of cultural space opportunities is identified and stewarded through capacity building, typically a brokered marketplace to match available and future spaces with needs, and early stage funding to support project exploration. All of that with the goal of building more successful cross-sectoral partnerships and aligning agendas towards shared community outcomes. So mentorship programs like Arts Build, communities of practice for venue operators. If we all remember the Space Finder websites in different municipalities, and things like Meanwhile Space programs are all examples that build awareness and capacity in the pipeline. However, the migration to securing space is often managed by the property sector, and in some cases, facility departments within municipalities. Acquisition and development, the third phase of the cycle. This is typically where the interface between the private sector, the municipality, and the culture sector is the most intense and the most transactional. So the goal, though, let's go back. Sorry, that went forward. Wasn't supposed to. Wait, yeah, thanks. The goal here is to build a lot of collaborative partnerships between intermediaries, city business units, funders, and a knowledgeable property sector that's based on an alignment of value propositions, clear expectations of outcomes, and de-risking of innovative financial and development models. That all leads to space provision at scale. Activation and operations, this is really where the value of the cultural sector shines, the day-to-day management, use, and programming of a creative space, ensuring that the facility or the venue meets its objectives, serves its intended community, and operates with a sustainable business model. And ideally, there is a scaffolding of financial supports and civic cultural anchor partnerships that better enable equity, stability, and vitality of small to mid-sized cultural spaces that we all know generate value for the diversity of communities across the city. The last phase that she identified was evaluation, and most often this is delivered based on the individual reporting needs of each cultural facility to its, its specific funders, rather than an ecosystem-wide approach. And the goal here is to capture and communicate data broadly, employing things like an impact framework that uses consistent definitions, metrics, and methodologies to demonstrate the collective value of all the cultural space outcomes. SPRE entities are increasingly essential as intermediaries to de-risk and bring specific skill sets to this cycle, facilitate effective collaboration between government, the cultural sector, and the property sector to deliver a broad range of impactful projects. There we go. Doing some odd things, but that's all right. Credit to Brian McVeigh from 221A out of Vancouver for creating this great sort of simple but really well-conceived graphic that I've adapted a bit and I'm showing here. There's a spectrum of SPRE strategies that move from the most accessible options for space development with a little bit of an increased risk of displacement to the most permanent with increased stability. So on the temporary accessible end of the spectrum, there are things like meanwhile uses that have, minimal capital requirements, short-term licenses or leases. It often involves soft costs only, utilities, insurance, and sort of basic improvements. It's got limited security for the sector, but immediate activation outcomes. Examples can be everything from pop-up galleries and experimental spaces to incubators. Also on that accessible end is subsidized rental space, so below market rents in existing buildings. Once again, limited tenant improvements required, but usually terms of 1 to 5 years. These can include things like artist studios and multi-tenant buildings, nonprofit offices, that kind of stuff. In the middle of the spectrum, there are options like master leases with subleasing rights. So organizations, nonprofits will hold the primary lease. They curate a mix of subtenants, maybe some control over the space programming. It can last typically in sort of 5 to 10-year terms. Lots of cultural hubs in this world. Long-term ground leases, those are typically 30 to 99-year terms and separate the land and the building ownership, and it allows for significant control over improvements and an ability to leverage those improvements for financing. But it really requires significant development capacity. Some examples, I think, are cultural facilities on public or church-owned land. On the far right side is the more permanent equity building end of the spectrum. They can be land trusts, which allow for sort of perpetual ownership of land, democratic governance, strong affordability protections, really high community control. But they generally are a permanent removal from the speculative market of assets. Shared equity models, makes ownership more affordable up front while preserving some long-term affordability. There's typically resale restrictions embedded in the deeds or stipulated in things like co-op agreements. And then, of course, there's sort of direct ownership or even community asset transfer where there's full, property control, asset appreciation potential, Public or SPRE assets can be transferred to community ownership. Might start with a SPRE entity, but might end up in a nonprofit community-based organization. CAST is a great example of that in San Francisco. So that's sort of the spectrum. Just a quick question. Are you guys managing the slide transition?
They are, Reid. For some reason, yours wasn't showing, so feel free to just say next slide.
Okay, next slide, please. Less work for me. Let's go one more. Let's talk about the iron triangle a little bit here. So we all know that there are a range of different outcomes that all of the organizations involved in SPRE for arts and culture try to achieve, whether it's cultural equity or social challenges or economic prosperity, environmental impacts. Achieving those outcomes requires business models that balance a social mission and the enterprise platform that delivers it. So the nonprofit finance fund here in the US uses what they call the iron triangle. So many of you have no doubt seen this before. The framework comprises mission, which is what hubs do and how they do it. So the main challenge is to manage the demands of mission and ensure that you're solving for the right pains and gains. The question to ask is what makes this project desirable and impactful to a broad base of community stakeholders. The other part of the triangle is capacity. So the people and the partnerships and the processes that allow them to do what they do. So this is really about feasibility and building the operational capacity of the organization through staffing, governance, partnerships, and processes that are all key to delivering value propositions through various stages of growth. The last piece of the puzzle, or the last pillar, is capital, and that's the cost structure, the capitalization and revenue streams of the business model. And this answers questions around the financial viability of the project. The main idea here is that change in one inevitably has impact, planned or unplanned, on the others. So any change in a point of the triangle requires adjustments in capacity, capital structure, and occasionally mission as well. So success with any one is almost never enough to drive a project from idea to actuality. The critical scaffolding that is missing from this on a regular basis or in the past that underpins all of those business model components is community resonance. And resonance is the quality and a sound of deep and full and reverberating. So if a social enterprise work deeply matters to its community, then it struck the right chord. And if not, there will be a lack of harmony among all the musical notes. So community gives the mission of the hub organization credibility and relevancy if it's consistently addressing the needs and the aspirations of those it serves. Community also provides durability and longevity to the capacity of the organization through things like, the provision of the human capital required for effective leadership through dedicated boards, CEO and staff teams, as well as all the critical partnerships that bring immense value to the success of projects. Community also provides sustainability to the business model. If the nature of the value proposition remains compelling and rewarding over time. So failure on one or more dimensions, be it lack of capital funding or weak community support or inadequate governance or leadership capacity, or even a vision that's simply not compelling, is enough to derail a project. And it's my experience that few projects start off in perfect alignment and even fewer end there. But there are many strategic choices along the way that need to sort of reinforce each other. When the mission of the organization, people inside who constitute the core capacity of the group, and then the stakeholders in the community around the project and all the underlying finances all fit coherently with one another, then the business model creates a really resilient foundation for impact. Next slide. Okay, so here's where the rubber hits the road. Let's translate those high-level theories into how a real business model for a Creative Hub project was designed and executed over its development and its launch period. For those of you who aren't familiar with cSPACE, from about 2010 to 2019, I had the honor of being the founding CEO for cSPACE projects in Calgary. It was established collaboratively by Calgary Arts Development Authority and the Calgary Foundation as a nonprofit enterprise to develop a portfolio of community-based hubs for the creative and cultural sector. For the rest of the presentation, I'll use the development and launch of that organization's flagship hub as a case study in what worked and some things that didn't work in our business model design and execution. So to do this, I'm going to be taking that triangle concept we just talked about and show you how that translates into a more detailed business model canvas. And these canvases are used to visually tell a story and describe the logic of how social enterprises create and capture value for communities. They can be used with your staff teams to prototype new ideas, test assumptions for existing business models, and support more detailed pro formas for projects. And the canvas is a riff on the original framework that was developed by a company called Strategizer, with a few revisions that I feel make it more relevant for social enterprises. So as a basic overview, it's comprised of 11 interrelated elements within 3 core blocks of mission, capacity, and capital. So on the right-hand side in red is the mission block, the left in yellow is the capacity block, and the blue is the capital block. Next slide, please. Now let's go one more. All right, mission block. So the mission block starts with the value propositions to the co-creators involved in the project, as well as all the types of relationships and channels that they use to connect and the intended social outcomes. So moving through this describes the beneficiaries, the users, the investors, and the partners, and what value the hub business model delivers for and generates with them. So it describes what the expectations for interaction are and which platforms are utilized to cultivate those relationships. And finally, it describes the theory of change, outputs, the outcomes, and the long-term impacts that the mission is intended to deliver. Next slide. The very first thing from my perspective to think about is to define who you generate value for and with. The business model of cSPACE centers on successfully delivering value to the diverse creative communities across Calgary. So the core value proposition was conceived around a vision of co-creation among Calgary's creatives and cSPACE as a community builder. So cSPACE owns, builds, and operates affordable multi-tenant shared space. And we set up the organization to cultivate vibrant communities and facilitate collaboration. In exchange for that, the communities of nonprofits and artists and designers and makers and musicians and dancers do what they do best, right? They generate immense public value for Calgarians through their artistic visions, their innovative programming, their entrepreneurial ideas, and their citizen engagement. So as a real estate intermediary, cSPACE is also focused on facilitating the exchange of value among those communities who generate creative and cultural capital, and the investors, the partners, and stakeholders who provide financial and political capital to deliver the hub projects. And those can include investors and shareholders, government funders, community and private foundations, individual and corporate donors. They can include partners, so financial intermediaries, post-secondary education institutions, companies, consultants, contractors, many of which who had a pretty deep commitment to the success of the project, and land development partners. It also extends to users of the facility, so local residents and businesses and groups such as adjacent bid and community association organizations. So to varying degrees and with different priorities, each investor, partner, and user has been mobilized by a shared interest in realizing cSPACE's core value proposition to build sustainable communities that address the instability, the isolation, and the uncertainty faced by the cultural and creative sector while delivering significant public value. So to define those value propositions, we focused on gathering insight through 3 lenses or scales: the Calgary ecosystem, the neighborhoods surrounding the site, and the eventual community of creatives populating the building. Next slide. So we gathered, can I advance the next slide, please? Great. So we gathered insights from a pretty extensive community research, engagement, and mapping process to understand the issues various creative communities faced across the cultural ecosystem, and narrowed down our focus on who we should be focusing our impact on. That high-level work at this stage really built the foundations for a business case and signaled a broad base of political and community support for investment. Next slide. Through the effort of engaging with all those different space providers in open conversations in the city, we focused on shaping the value proposition in relation to the existing landscape. So our positioning recognized the roles that independent artist-run centers, nonprofit shared office centers, commercial co-working spaces, and even tech incubators played in relation to supporting the breadth of the cultural and creative sector. So the graph at the left illustrates an ambitious strategy to be as affordable as artist-run centers and social service-oriented shared space providers, generate opportunities for more diverse, multidisciplinary, multi-sector connectivity than was offered perhaps by the more discipline and sector-specific offerings. We had a goal to deliver more arts-focused community building value than maybe existing commercial co-working spaces. And we wanted to build up incubation supports similar to what the startup tech organizations were delivering. So flexible and accessible event space, meeting rooms, exhibition venues, small theaters for rehearsal and performance were all identified at that level as priorities in our research. And we're emerging really as important elements of our financial sustainability model. So we compiled research on pricing models, locations, capacities, and technical capabilities to ensure that we were addressing the real need in the community. Next slide, please. We also looked through a neighborhood lens at where creative communities lived, what places they identified as possible locations they would consider for workspace, what transportation options were available, and a whole bunch of other market considerations. So when we were in the early stages of exploring the eventual site of the first hub, we spent more energy on exploring the makeup of the neighborhoods surrounding them. Next slide, please. At a more granular level, we gathered a rich and detailed data set from the creative community through multiple layers of engagement with artists and nonprofits. A detailed space market survey and focus groups delivered a snapshot of demand to help us scope the potential market size for the hub project and what amenities, lease rates, and space sizes were going to deliver the most value. We followed this research-based exploration with successive calls for potential tenants. First, as an accessible REOI process that identified potential partners and provided an important narrative for building awareness and momentum and building our case. As the project concept evolved, we gathered more detailed research through a more extensive RFP call that required organizations and artists to communicate their intent for programming, capabilities they brought to the table, timing of their needs, scale of space, and et cetera. So at the same time, we took advantage of an opportunity to pilot a meanwhile space. We took on a 20,000 square foot former warehouse that we adapted cheaply to artist studios and rehearsal space for nearly 2 years. It not only started to create relationships and trust with the artists and organizations, but it built up our capabilities internally for property management and, once again, confirmed the demand for space. Next slide, please. All of those initial insights helped define cSPACE's strategy for building its initial portfolio. So there were 4 key elements that were designed to balance capacity and capital. We were going to develop projects that were positioned to attract diverse capital funding sources from all sectors. We were focusing on regenerating underused buildings, including heritage properties located in walkable and transit-connected neighborhoods. We focused on identifying project opportunities that leverage scale, flexibility, and efficiency to be mission supportive and financially viable. And then we looked at amplifying our core businesses of property development and hub management by partnering with post-secondary institutions, other orders of government, agencies, and nonprofits to develop sort of that added value service offer and community engagement opportunities. Once we narrowed down the priorities for specific types of spaces that the community desired, we explored a lot of different property acquisition opportunities across the inner city that could serve that need. And these really ranged from single or groups of underutilized heritage buildings owned privately or publicly, um, integration of more sort of modestly sized creative spaces into new mixed use development, and reuse of surplus public property through land leases. It wasn't until a 3-acre vacant school site came up for sale by the school board that our strategic criteria that we talked about earlier was fully met. It was a distressed property that had been declared surplus to the school board's needs, but had failed twice to close with private sector buyers. The Heritage School had the right scale and community significance. At the time, the site area had the potential for land value uplift that would contribute substantively to the capital requirements of delivering the hub. Next slide. We entered into a purchase and sale agreement with the school board and triggered an extended due diligence period. So our key objective was to clearly signal our intent as a community builder and begin that long and iterative process of generating trust among all those co-creators involved in the project that I talked about earlier. We listened early and often, sharing decision making through the process of exploration and refinement of the vision. We had local residents and community association joined board members, artists, developers, designers, and senior city staff on our advisory committees. Hundreds of people attended our public open houses to share insights and perspectives on that evolving master plan and design. We also went out to where people were, setting up booths at festivals and libraries and community events. Dozens of artists and nonprofit organizations participated in our concept development. And that investment in open dialogue and collaborative design for us was purposeful. I believe strongly that accountability for transforming communities grows out of the act of co-creating with them. Next slide. We started exploring how we would approach shaping the experience of the building for our tenants and the public. We had very public floors with the theater and the cafe, artist and maker retail and galleries. We had event spaces on the top floors to draw people up through the building. We were surrounded by 4 sides of housing, so needed to think about the AM and PM rhythm of the building in terms of intensity of use and parking. Ideas began to solidify about mixes of creative spaces. Through that period, we looked at activation of hallways as places of collaboration and expression. If you guys have ever walked through these old school buildings, they have 20 to 30 foot wide hallways that always allowed the young teenagers to smooch and everything else. But man, from a building efficiency perspective, they're tough to figure out. And then we looked at the reuse of the historic fabric and ideas around prioritizing certain floors to the public. So next slide. Bringing creativity into the public realm was a driving force behind the site design. We looked at it through the eyes of users and how they would engage with the space, and infrastructure as a canvas for cultural building. Next slide. We worked with disability advocates to understand how circulation throughout the site reinforced permeability and legibility and accessibility. And the design approach was really an antithesis to that of school grounds, which are, often conceived and operated as protected and closed and secure space from the outside. Next slide, please. We had an ambition also to showcase sustainable design in everything we did. It was certainly driven by our values, but equally it was about investing in capital up front that would reduce op costs down the line. Next slide. So developing on a former school site, surrounded by four sides of housing is not for the faint of heart. It was an iterative and highly valuable dialogue that once again built up the level of trust in us as a community builder, not a place breaker. Based on that approved community-driven master plan for the site, we held a national call for development partners. So our collective vision, our engagement work with the community, and our support from City Council created immense value for development partners and generated trust in our ability to execute the project. Following some hiccups that I'll talk about a little bit later in the capital block section, we eventually secured two fantastic partners who not only purchased the properties and developed beautiful buildings on each side of it, but worked with the artistic community to integrate public art and programming into their spaces. They also became significant donors to the capital campaign above and beyond their site acquisitions. Next slide, please. So what emerged from those 2 years of engagement and planning was a bold shared vision, a restored, 1912 heritage building transformed into a LEED Gold certified community hub held in the public trust in perpetuity. It was a vital community of nonprofits, cultural entrepreneurs and artists delivering innovative programs and cultural experiences for our city. It was an accessible series of accessible multi-purpose spaces that enhanced the provision of existing community facilities in the area. It was a collaborative model of land development, leveraging all the resources of multiple sectors, governments, disciplines, and investors. It was a viable business model based on diversifying earned revenue streams that underpin the affordability and stability of the project over the long term. And lastly, it was a distinctive cultural tourism asset that elevated the visibility of local talent. That's primarily what was driving it. Next slide, please. The relationships that we built during that period were critical to our long-term success, both from a fundraising perspective and a community building one. As any of you who have been an ED or CEO through a capital campaign, you understand the role of the pitch, the constant tours, the community conversations, donor salons, presentations that are innumerable. And all of that is what it takes to build momentum for a project. Next slide. Along with the volume of presentations to groups and high touch sort of one-on-one conversations, other channels like local media were critical for building awareness. I was agnostic and opportunistic in leveraging every moment I could to generate news cycles of media interest. We built great relationships with some key partners who continually supported us through a long development period. Next slide. Aside from those formal channels of, tenant calls, there was an equal focus on activating and connecting directly with various communities through social media platforms. So we use storytelling about the history of the school, the aspects of the vision, the construction progress, as well as ultimately celebrating our tenant community's creative endeavors. We utilized a lot of in-house capabilities and partnerships with artists who participated in developing things like a campaign of video content. So once we opened, social platforms from all of our tenants and users of the building generated this critical mass that collectively communicated our mission progress. Next slide, please. So in my experience, there is a development arc of Creative Hub projects that starts with, the best instinct you can have around what the right creative ingredients are. So how do you assemble creativity at the beginning? Hubs assemble some mix of people, place, and ideas, right? That ignites the vision. Though, it's not always in that order. And this stage is pretty critical in terms of curation and the building project itself. But if you stop there, you're stuck at co-location and a reliance on outcomes of solely what proximity can generate. The next sort of evolution is around nurturing community, and more intentional hubs nurture community to bind all of those ingredients that I just talked about into something that's bigger than the sum of their parts. So anchoring diversity alone is not a guarantor of engagement. There needs to be reasons to interact. Many hubs around the world engage in this work, but if you don't do it well, it's where many of them plateau. Third is around cultivating capacity. And really at this stage, there are less hubs that do this, but the ones that do it cultivate a deeper capacity for collaboration by applying an essential source of energy, building trust. It is the lubricant that supports relationships and makes collaboration work based on transparency and credibility, integrity, and also generosity. The last sort of phase of that arc is around change. And, we talked about sort of different outcomes at the beginning of a hub's journey about what they want, what impact they want in a community. Hubs expend an immense amount of resources and time to build the capacity and capabilities for collaboration among their diverse communities to support the chemistry for change. These ones are system change agents, and they are few and far between. So from assembling the elements of creativity and nurturing community, cultivating capacity, and shaping change, you recognize that transformation requires shifting the conversation and signaling a new possibility. Those images on the bottom of the screen there, they're indicative of the work that was put into just the first few years of sort of putting this together and opening. So, in 2012, we had an 80,000 square foot vacant and derelict building that we had to change the conversation about. And we had to become relevant to the cultural sector we were trying to serve, and we had to build trust with the local neighborhood. So in the early days of pre-construction, we partnered with Jane's Walks to unpack and celebrate the legacy of the Heritage School. We opened our doors and worked with Calgary's most prolific kind of young community builders to truly explore the possibility of what like an interdisciplinary creative hub could be. So we had one week or 1 month we had over 80 organizations and artists from all disciplines and missions populating our building over a summer weekend to sort of showcase what community building looks like. We partnered with 15 artist teams to do large scale temporary installations using salvaged material throughout the buildings that were to be demolished. At the same time, we hosted a Pachacacha speaker night and a YYC fashion week showcasing young designers. And we hosted a local market collective of over 150 artists and artisans over multiple weekends. And 6,000 people per weekend came through that raw pre-construction site. It certainly tested the neighbors' interest in parking. But we also paid commissions to artists for projects, and we sponsored contemporary art showcases and built relationships with, graduate arts groups and hired artists as staff. Probably one of our most rewarding strategies was to embed over $200,000 of public art throughout our site, and that was delivered by young artists who had community engagement at the heart of their practice. Next slide, please. So we designed with the scale to facilitate collaboration. And these hub type buildings work best when they function as platforms for many different communities and networks to converge. At cSPACE, the Creative Commons provided the backbone of the facility. It was a highly adaptable portfolio of production, rehearsal, and creative spaces for artists, cultural entrepreneurs, and nonprofits to generate new work, to innovate in their mission, and ultimately to accelerate their impact in our city and beyond. While we were committed to inclusivity, we did spend an immense amount of time in a deep and deliberative effort to curate the startup community there. We focused on partners who could benefit from and contribute to a collaborative and ultimately pluralistic workspace. So if you were there, if accessing cheap space could not be the sole motivation for joining cSPACE. You had to have a practice or a program embedded in community and a mindset for collaboration, and that's not everybody. Our diverse community at the time I left to New Jersey a few years ago included artist and designer studios, publishing and literary organizations, small music, theater, and dance company, including one of Calgary's only Indigenous theater communities, Latino and French cultural organizations. We had craft and fine art galleries, a collaborative arts center focused on building job skills for new immigrants and people with disabilities, a seniors learning center, and a nonprofit Montessori child center. It's kind of like cradle to grave in many ways. Didn't plan that. Uh, a continuing education program of our city's art and design school, an emerging artist residency program. We had photography, film, and music entrepreneurs. We had a mobile glass blowing truck and a Latino owned cafe. So we also addressed a long-standing need for an affordable and adaptable 140 seat studio theater that could easily convert to a bunch of different things, a Swiss Army knife. Next slide. In order to incubate successful creative and social enterprise, many hubs deliver sort of specialized education and peer exchange opportunities. So the learning commons was important to us. It was designed as the connective tissue of the building's working communities and provide opportunities for knowledge sharing, partnering, sharing of skills and resources, continuing professional development and networking across disciplines and sectors and communities. We did it through a mission-aligned partnership model at cSPACE. So we worked with both our anchor tenants and strategic organizations throughout the city to pilot programming around leadership training and entrepreneurship and mentorship opportunities specific to the cultural and creative sector. Obviously, exchange was also facilitated by the hard infrastructure of the building, so free and subsidized meeting, conference, and collaboration venues. We invested in leading edge broadband networks and online collaboration platforms, social kitchen and shared gathering places. There was a common exhibition showcase and workshop spaces. And we also had sort of short-term hot desk workspaces for organizations that expand and contract or for freelancers that value flexibility. Next slide. Embedded within existing neighborhoods, hubs need to be valued gathering places. So a community commons that provides unique opportunities for participation and exploration and engagement with all those diverse expressions of a city's cultures and creativity is a part of the vision and part of the mission. So from public art that addressed Indigenous reconciliation and engaged young children in sort of playful and imaginative installations, to structural steel art cubes in the landscape that could convert from stages to exhibition infrastructure, to market stalls, to outdoor meeting spaces, to things like the reuse of the old school's radiator cores to line an outdoor event space and its intricately designed boiler doors showcased under glass floors. We conceived of every last inch of cSPACE as canvases that amplified the role of artists and cultural enterprises as place activators. So connecting the creative activity within buildings to the surrounding site and the broader neighborhood. And in my experience, hubs like cSPACE are at their most impactful in the community's quality of life if the facility is accessible, inclusive, and innovative as places where art, culture, and creativity is lived on a daily basis. So that is the mission block. Looking at my time, I'm going to crank this up a little bit. Let's go to the next, let's skip over the next slide. And let's move to the capacity block. So that was all about mission and all the things that go into making mission hum in a business model. The capacity block, this illustrates the people, the partnerships, and the processes, right, that allow the hub enterprise to do what they do. And this includes resources required, activities, and partnerships that are all key to delivering those value propositions. Next slide. I created this slide of a bunch of pretty but very empty spaces and a picture of the three staff that comprise cSPACE at the groundbreaking to illustrate the capacity challenge we faced to launch, a significant leasing and events venue business. So I had a theater set designer with an architect degree as a director of building ops. We had a festival producer as an office manager, and right before opening, a French custodian who we stole from our construction manager. Sounds like there's a, three people walk into a bar joke, but all of us were prepared to bootstrap as we operated assets, as all of our operated assets came online. So the plan was to start lean, grow incrementally, and scale as required. But the event business shot out like a cannon, and like the technical complexity of the building systems of a 50,000 square foot space were pretty daunting. Next slide. In preparation for transitioning from capital project development to hub management, the capacity of staff to launch and operate the facility was built through external training investments, as well as leveraging the systems training by the construction trades required for occupancy. We had full service maintenance contracts in the beginning for all the major systems. They were secured mostly from the trades that installed the equipment as a bit of a risk management strategy. This was a financial pressure on the operating expenses, but necessary for managing a pretty highly complex facility with a relatively inexperienced staff team. So throughout that transition period, staff scaled up as cash flow allowed for the part-time evening weekend staff, driven by the requirements of the event and theater venues. But in order to deliver on our mission while addressing our growing staff needs, a pool of artists with experience in venue management and omni-skilled theater technicians who could manage lighting, sound, a little bit of client requirements were hired to build out cSPACE's capacity to successfully manage the operated assets. Next slide. Equally, development of the board was a critical capacity building effort. So you'll recognize these next few slides from a place called Board Source and the governance as leadership approach to various sort of modes that directors need in their roles, from generative thinking to strategic to fiduciary. I share these not because I want to go into a deep dive on board governance, but I want to reinforce how important all of these roles were at different stages of our project. Go to the next slide, please. One of my challenges as a CEO was nurturing the capacity of our board of directors to be engaged in significant fundraising. So as a newly incorporated nonprofit real estate company, cSPACE faced a highly competitive fundraising environment in Calgary with billions of dollars worth of nonprofit capital campaigns that were active in the market at the time. While the entrepreneurial startup board comprised two individuals who secured over $1 million in contributions and provided credibility in key areas of cSPACE's development activity, subsequent board compositions migrated to a heavy reliance on the fiduciary mode. Go to the next slide, please. I had a group of corporate directors trained formally through the same institute program that made it very difficult to engage in sort of broader strategy discussions. I had 4 separate fundraising consultants who were engaged at different times from 2013 to 2017 to help shape campaign strategy and support board leadership. I would say that limited success was achieved in mentoring and mobilizing leadership at the board level and nurturing a broadly understood and accepted culture of effective donor cultivation and stewardship. And so to mitigate that risk area, we leveraged the profile and the reputation that was afforded the organization through its partnership with the Calgary Foundation. So lots of presentations to granting committees and advocacy at the foundation led to a whole bunch of critical connections made with what was to become key donors to the capital project. An overwhelming proportion of individual contributions to the project were made through these direct and indirect relationships with the foundation, including over 1.1 million from the 2 largest individual donors themselves. Next slide, please. A similar strategy of mobilizing partners to address capacity challenges was used in delivering our kind of program ambitions around supporting entrepreneurship in the arts and cultural sector. Startup funding for cSPACE's proposed incubation programming wasn't successful, applied lots of different places. And without those necessary resources, staff focused on building relationships with external organizations that delivered entrepreneurship training for creatives through co-promotion as well as, space sponsorship of classroom and conference space. A local university's continuing ed department was intended to be a major program partner as an anchor tenant, but they terminated their lease due to a change in departmental leadership and a challenging funding environment at the province. We instead focused on sponsoring and partnering with organizations who delivered really diverse sort of education, networking, and skills development content at cSPACE. Let's move on to the capital side of things. Next slide, please. So the capital block, this illustrates the costs and the revenue streams of the business model, as well as the overall capitalization structure. Alignment of capital funding and design construction of a new cultural facility really generates and builds momentum for the project. It's rarely linear. The decision-making process about nonprofit building projects is typically iterative as, all the obstacles and risks present themselves, and information kind of becomes a little more concrete as you move through. Next slide. Just as some context before I jump into how the capital stack was generated and what cSPACE's sort of business model revenue and cost structures look like. The illustration on this slide provides the overall view of the site development. So we had 2 phases to the hub project. The adaptive reuse of the historic school structure was phase 1. The addition of a contemporary wing that recreated the footprint of a historic wing demolished in the 1970s was phase 2. So 2 parcels were master planned, rezoned, and subdivided to include complementary mixed uses and generate equity for cSPACE in the capital stack. Next slide. This is really an example or a high-level look at the capital stack for the space. It all started with early investment and a shared investment by the Calgary Foundation and the City of Calgary. So we really used that as a catalytic investment that together gave us validity in the eyes of lots of senior levels of government and the private sector, as well as a sense that the project had momentum and build. It was absolutely not linear, and I'll sort of describe to you in another slide about some challenges that we faced for the timing of that. Next slide, please. Let me describe what you're looking at here. The years and the various stages of the project are on the x-axis. The colored bars are the financing stacks from various capital funding sources. So shades of gray are government funds, shades of blue are foundation and philanthropic funds, yellow is land sales proceeds, patterned light blue is the 7.45 million in bridge financing required for acquisition of the site. Patterned red is the 3.5 million in construction and takeout financing required to complete the project. So the what does this tell us? We required over $200,000 in risk capital from our shareholders and an early investment from the province to support stuff like building conditions, feasibility work, preliminary cost estimates, and the master planning work. That was all before we completed the extensive due diligence period afforded us from the school board. So we could have walked away from the project at that point. Once we were confident that the entitlements could be secured and there was a high level of support for progressing, the timing of acquisition funding was the next challenge. So a commitment from the City of Calgary for 5 million and the foundation for the remaining 3 million would not be released in time for the purchase and sale agreement closing. So we turned to low cost, patient capital to bridge finance the acquisition. And the foundation launched its first ever program related investment with us for 7.45 million. This afforded us an interest-only loan at better rates than we could find from traditional banks. We had no track record, and that was fully paid off by the release of the city funds and the proceeds from the land sales. A lot of different submissions to the federal government were unsuccessful. At the last political level of decision making, we would get supported all the way up to the region, and then once it made national, we lost a number of different propositions going in. A $5 million request for provincial funding was approved for $3 million, but it allowed us to initiate demolition and hazmat abatement. It was a risk to start while still fundraising, but the heritage building was declining rapidly, and I felt the majesty of the 1912 school revealed without its crappy, mid-century additions would be helpful in our fundraising work. We had wonderful support from the provincial minister of culture at the time, who leveraged an existing anonymous donor we had already secured to provide an additional matching grant of 500K. So strong partnership, strong relationship triggered a lot of different critical points. You'll notice the two lightning bolts in 2014. We had gone through our process of engaging developers and had secured two partners. However, numerous requests for extensions to due diligence periods signaled a really growing risk that the conditional purchase and sale agreements would not close in sufficient time to support our construction start timelines. So the developer for the east parcel required an additional 6 months to repackage their other assets, including the cSPACE site, for an institutional pension fund. We didn't know they were doing that. The developer of the west parcel was pushing for a joint venture approach with a long-term investment return window for cSPACE, not a risk-sharing model that would work for our first project. As a result, both original proponents were released before their first deposits were due. And seeing nearly $10 million disappear from your capital stack in a period of weeks was a pretty unique experience for me. We mined the existing list of proposals and found a developer who wanted both properties and had a significant individual as an investor behind them. Then the price of barrel of oil went from $100 to $20 in a matter of weeks, and they wanted to be released from one of the sites, hence the second lightning bolt. So long story short, I retained the unrecoverable deposit they made for 700K, concluded the sale on the property they did hold on to, and sold the larger remaining parcel to an amazing partner that came out of the woodwork, hence the sunny day icon. So the closing of the land sales and some additional success at sort of philanthropic donation launched us into phase one construction. Phase two faced hurdles as a result of the energy sector decline and its impact on fundraising. We managed to secure additional funds from our shareholders, the city and the province. We also had a political change at the federal level and a new national policy on, supporting creative hubs across Canada. So we were now, the darlings of the show, and they funded 2.5 million for the second phase. So recognizing the challenging economic situation in the city and the lack of capacity at the board level for major gift cultivation and the risk of, shareholder fatigue, we financed the remaining gap with 3.5 million in construction and takeout funds. Next slide. Almost there, guys. We're almost there. Switching to the revenue side of the business model, the gray portion of the bars is earned revenue and the blue is contributed. So the pie charts on the right, they represent the composition of each category, earned and contributed, as a percentage of total revenue. So I did it based on an average of sort of 2019 as the pre-COVID first year of operations and 2022 as the post-COVID recovery year, just to kind of show those two together. cSPACE's general operating model for the hub is based on, aggregating local demand for affordable leaseholds, right, across a diverse array of cultural spaces. Collectively, those represent a stable operating platform for building that has the scale and the diversity and, the adaptability to be generally financially sustainable over the long term. Taking an average of those 2 years, these represent approximately 41% of the total revenue in an average year. It's also premised on the need for sufficient cross subsidy from other earned income channels to maintain the affordability threshold of its creative community. These include theater and co-working space, as well as meeting, event, and gallery rental space. So collectively, they contribute another 29% of revenue in an average year. Contributed revenue has been primarily delivered via the shareholder relationship with the Arts Authority. So this annual funding is applied to cSPACE's sort of broader role in exploring and assessing other spaces throughout the city. However, as we all know, COVID recovery funds increase the percentage of contributed funds, as well as short-term municipal program contracts, both of which were, concluded obviously in the fiscal years following this picture. So the 70-30 mix of earned to contributed is similar to other benchmark projects in Canada. On the OpEx side, the bars represent the mix of expenses that Hub generates with staffing and operating costs. So if you could flip to the next slide. This reflects, a lot of volatility in the utility environment, but also the demands of recovery in the business, event business. So additional pressure also comes from loan renewals in the current interest environment, though I understand my colleague Dieter, who's running the show there now, converted his existing traditional financing vehicles to lower cost solutions sponsored by the Calgary Foundation. Yet another key role for foundations in Canada. The underlying assumption is that the value proposition of cSPACE's hubs, affordability, quality, flexibility, can all be delivered to communities of nonprofits and artists through a lean operating model, building system efficiencies and shared services. Next slide. Those are the three blocks of the canvas. So I'm wrapping up here. Aside from its use as a tool for iterative kind of business model design and planning, I've also used it to monitor and communicate kind of key risks to board and staff. Next slide, please. One more. So to wrap up, here's cSPACE's business model kind of all together. You have no doubt heard this before, but communities evolve at the speed of trust and the speed at which relationships form and deepen and become actionable. That's kind of key. So to achieve all of the intended impacts behind cSPACE, the business model of a hub needs to continually balance its mission, capacity, and capital in all of its efforts to build trust with the co-creators it serves. This generates velocity towards the change that we collectively want to see in our communities. So thanks, everybody. I am happy to answer any questions that you have. Much, much appreciated for your patience.
Not patience. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Reid. No patience required. That was an epic tour through an absolutely amazing project. The question box is open so people can pop their questions in. I know that I have some questions off the top. So first of all, yeah, thank you, Reid. And in particular, thank you. You go into such detail around the funding stack and how it came together. I think it's really helpful for people to see the journey and the ways in which it maybe didn't turn out as you were expecting. And jumping off of that, I wonder after this experience if there was anything you would do differently. I mean, you can't know what you didn't know, so there's that. But looking back, would you change anything of this journey?
Um, this was the first project of a new entity, and I think while we spend a lot of time embedding into conversations about sort of the future of Calgary's proposition for small arts and cultural organizations, we benefited immensely from a ton of work that came before us. And it was really critical to respect not only organizations who were doing space development work, but try and figure out how we could collaborate with them. And, we had times where um, lots of artist-run centers who were part of our early tenant identification process we took so long on the development that a lot of their boards shifted and a lot of their financial situations changed. So being clear-eyed about the time that it takes to not only sort of galvanize the mission, but to actually build momentum and execute was a lot longer than I think I anticipated. And so for me, it's setting expectations early about the development path and the time it takes to pull these things off effectively and with impact. Um, that being said, I think I knew this from the beginning, but a third of Fed, province, city is no longer can no longer be counted on and should never be an assumption
Mm.
in your capital stack. Things are changing immensely right now. I just got finished doing the cultural infrastructure plan for the city of Calgary and for CADA. And the data we pulled together on where Canada Council has been going against other things like Alberta Foundation for the Arts and Canadian Heritage is under some level of attack. So, the world of financing that exists in the United States, where there are all these interesting mechanisms to provide access to low cost financing, in addition to, I think, a shrinking government solution, we just don't have yet. And so we tested that boundary with the first PRI from Calgary Foundation. And, you know, the only reason that we executed what we did is because of that partnership with the Calgary Foundation. So
Mhm.
reinforcing that those foundational relationships are key.
Yeah, and the position too in the arts in advocacy in regards to disbursement quotients, right? And paying attention to what's happening at the Senate level around requests for disbursement quotients to be higher for foundations and then the ways in which social purpose real estate lending is starting to become more common. But I think we're just at the beginning of that, and you guys were certainly well before that in your process.
Well, and just coming from San Francisco to sort of hear about, 20 other cities across the world, from Europe to United States to Poland, the list goes on. Um, One of the key kind of things that caught everybody's attention was the Rainin Foundation's interest in pooling capital amongst multiple foundations. So pooling
Mhm.
PRIs from 3 or 4 different foundations who work in a city to try and, you know, reduce the weaving and the pressure on the organization to actually pull that capital stack together to mobilize low cost financing in a different way. So that's really great.
Yeah, for sure. We have a question here that kind of aligns. If you were to start this project now, do you think it would be different based on the funds that are now available around public projects that address affordable housing via retrofits? And how might that have adjusted that project, do you think?
Um, yeah, I mean, we came in with an ambition to be the lead developer on a 3-acre site. So we weren't coming in as um, a, a minor partner in a private sector or even a nonprofit housing sector development project. So control of the 3-acre site was critical, envisioning that it was always going to be a mixed use project driven by an ambition for at least showcasing what arts led, culture led, good urbanism could look like in Calgary. And so we always knew that there was uplift, and that ultimately was a little less than a third of the capital stack came from the private land sales. Um, we had played with different options on those 2 sites to have affordable housing providers. We also looked into 10 units of affordable artist housing. We did some early sort of feasibility work, but at the time there was no interest and no capital that was flowing to affordable housing in Canada at the time. And it wasn't a compelling offer. I think nowadays, I think if we had a 3-acre site to play with and we recognize that the visibility of affordable housing and the urgency of affordable housing is at a critical stage right now, we would have ensured that there was an incorporated element in the plan, just
Yeah,
from a mission perspective, and artist housing as a niche of affordable housing generally has yet to be tackled in the city of Calgary.
it's yet to be tackled anywhere. It's still considered to be outside, worker housing, which is what arts worker housing is still on the periphery of the affordable housing conversation, right?
Yeah.
And as arts workers, I think there's still advocacy work to be done too about the amortization of your income over several years to establish what affordable is. That, one
Yeah.
good movie does not make you rich,
Yeah.
right? So yeah,
Yeah, and
it's
we made some difficult choices to kill the 10 housing units at a particular stage. We phased the project almost midstream because that western wing, the new contemporary wing, it could not have, or it we had the opportunity for it not to be included.
mm,
We always knew that part of the operating sustainability was driven by operated assets, earned revenue from theater, co-working space, and event space. We knew that was part of the mission, but we could have had there been a less um, cohesive capital stack and response from the foundation and from the different levels of government. We could have, dropped 9 million off of the site.
right. Got another question coming in. Considering the scale of the cooperative agreements needed to make everything happen, why not pursue a cooperative business model? I'm assuming the question is like a co-op assembly.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I think it was probably a comfort zone for me
Mm,
around, coming from the world that I did of, quasi-public development corporations in Edmonton and the downtown, going out to Artscape in Toronto, and we're, running their consulting arm for a few years.
mhm,
It was an owner operated, an owner developed, own, develop, and operate kind of model. I since then have come around to the future of these hubs being, a much broader array of business models that can be deployed. And I'm super interested about keeping the development expertise of a social purpose real estate company as the core proposition, of which you then work in partnership and collaboration with, what could be a theater company that buys and uses the building
mhm,
after 5 years of capacity building. Like there were so many interesting models that we heard about in the San Francisco summit that um, I'm much more interested in not taking all of the risk, all of the, sort of operating load. It can be delivered in a much more sort of cooperative level. So
mm.
I think in the future, I agree. Back then, it was sort of a comfort zone and a proposition that made sense to a lot of players because I'll be honest, there's a lot of tentativeness about the capacity of the arts sector to pull off these types of real estate developments, and quite rightfully in some ways.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody.
That's fair. But I think I do encourage arts groups to think about the lands that they own and the ways in which they can use the lands that they own to unlock greater potential, right? I think sometimes we're a little too careful and conservative, which is easy for me to say because I'm not running a theater company right now. And if you'd said that to me when I was at SPRE, I would have said, "Oh, this is conservative? Okay."
Yeah, I mean, there's great
Yeah.
examples of once you get the building done, also to conceive of it as a strata title process that builds equity in the community
Hmm.
you're there serving. I think there's shared equity models, there's
Hmm.
outright purchases. I mean, we're seeing it in Toronto the way that different things were redistributed after the Artscape challenge.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yep.
so yeah, lots of different ways to cut the project.
Yeah, and I should say I'm sitting in a co-working space right now that is above a CN rail station here in downtown Stratford. So it's fun to see how, these historic buildings in particular can be revisioned for a more modern usage pattern. The train still comes through here, but it comes twice a day. So
Yeah.
what do you do with the train station? Well, people work out of it, turns out. So,
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much, Reid. Anything else you want to tell us before we wrap things up here?
Keep your eyes out for the report that is coming out of our time in San Francisco. There is World Cities Cultural Group that I think will be compiling some of the ideas that came out of it. And it was a eye-opening, fascinating, kind of very specific effort in the work that we all do.
Yeah. Okay, great. We'll keep an eye out for that. So thanks so much for joining us today. And we hope everyone's leaving with some fresh insights and a sparked curiosity about how these things can be created. Certainly, I've always found Reid's approach to this to be incredibly helpful in teaching me about how to actually do it. So you'll see now that a little survey's popped up there. I know surveys are annoying, but it's how we tell our funders what you're thinking about what we're doing. So please take a moment to fill out the survey and keep your eye out for upcoming SPRE modules that we'll be bringing forth in the next little while. Oh yeah, and so we have some in-person panels that'll be coming up over the next few months too, so we'll let you know when those are ready to go. And if you'd like to stay connected, you can follow ArtsBuild Ontario on social media and on Eventbrite and sign up for the newsletters there. All right, thanks so much, Reid. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, everybody.